Engines thundered through the quiet evening as a pack of bikers tore down Main Street, leather jackets glinting under the streetlights. Their presence was loud, arrogant, and meant to draw eyes. People on the sidewalk slowed, heads turning as the gang came to a sudden stop in front of a small grocery store. Out of the shadows, a tall man stepped out, carrying a paper bag of groceries. His movements were calm, almost too calm, like someone who wasn't paying attention to the storm brewing in front of him. The lead biker smirked, spitting on the pavement before growling, Well, look who thinks he owns the sidewalk." The man didn't flinch. He adjusted the bag in his hands, the top revealing nothing more than a loaf of bread and a carton of milk. To the crowd, he looked like just another aging guy who had no business standing in the way of a biker gang. "Move it, old man," another biker barked, revving his engine aggressively. The roar of the bike echoed off the buildings, shaking windows. People nearby stepped back, whispering, already anticipating a scene they didn't want to get involved in. But the tall man didn't move. His steady gaze lingered on the bikers, calm, unreadable. That infuriated them even more. The lead biker dismounted, boots clanking on the asphalt. He was bigger than most, with a tattoo stretching across his neck and a sneer carved into his face. He shoved the man's shoulder hard enough to send most people stumbling. Still, the man didn't react. He only shifted slightly, ensuring his grocery bag didn't fall to the ground. His silence made the gang restless. One of them shouted from behind, "What's the matter, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue?" Laughter followed, ugly and sharp. The crowd around them tensed, expecting violence. Mothers pulled their children closer. A businessman muttered under his breath, "That guy's about to get destroyed." The tall man finally spoke, his voice low and even, carrying more weight than the bikers expected. "You should walk away." The gang roared with laughter, taking his calmness as weakness. To them, he was just an easy target, an older man outnumbered and outmatched. None of them realized the storm they were about to unleash, because the man they were threatening wasn't just anyone. He was Steven Seagal. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Steven Seagal stood in the glow of the streetlight, the grocery bag still balanced in his hands. The loaf of bread leaned against the milk carton, and a bundle of green onions poked out of the side. It was almost laughable, this towering man with broad shoulders, holding something as ordinary and fragile as groceries. While a circle of leather-clad bikers tried to box him in, the crowd expected him to defend himself right away. After all, who wouldn't? But Steven didn't raise his hands. He didn't shout back. Instead, he looked strangely vulnerable, like someone who had no interest in fighting at all. That calmness drove the bikers crazy. The leader stepped closer, squinting his eyes. "What's this? You buying dinner, Grandpa?" He snatched the loaf of bread out of the bag and tossed it onto the pavement. The bread skidded across the asphalt and stopped at the boot of another biker. The gang erupted in laughter. Steven's jaw tightened, but he didn't bend down to pick it up. His dark eyes simply followed the leader's hand as it hovered near the groceries again. "Oh, what's this?" the biker sneered, pulling out the carton of milk. He shook it like a trophy, then dropped it hard. The carton burst open, spilling white liquid across the pavement. The crowd gasped. Steven blinked once. His silence felt heavier than any shout could, but the bikers weren't finished. Another one reached into the bag, ripping out the bundle of onions and snapping it in half before tossing the pieces into the gutter. "Look at him. Doesn't even care," the biker shouted. To the onlookers, it was humiliating. A man's simple groceries, symbols of normal life, of quiet humanity, were being destroyed piece by piece. A child in the crowd clutched his mother's hand and whispered, "Why don't they stop?" But the mother only hushed him and pulled him closer. A businessman on the corner shook his head. Pathetic. He should just walk away before they hurt him. The whispers spread like poison. People assumed Seagal was powerless. Too old, too slow, too unwilling to stand up for himself. Some pitied him. Others judged him. Nobody stepped forward to help. The leader chuckled, towering over Steven. He shoved the now empty bag back into his chest. "That's it? That's all you got? Bread, milk, onions? You're useless, old man." Steven caught the bag, folding it neatly in his hand. Still, he didn't raise his voice. His silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. But nobody watching could understand that to them, it looked like a man being stripped of dignity piece by piece, while the world turned its back. The bikers leaned in closer now, emboldened by the crowd's inaction. One revved his bike engine again, sending exhaust smoke into Stephen's face. Another slapped his shoulder mockingly, saying, "Come on, Grandpa, show us what you've got. Or are you scared?" Stephen simply adjusted the sleeves of his jacket, as though preparing himself for the cold night air. His voice came out low, almost a whisper, but sharp enough that the closest biker flinched. "You've taken enough." The laughter quieted for just a moment. The words weren't shouted. They weren't a threat. But something in the tone carried weight. Like an iceberg lurking beneath calm water, the leader smirked, mistaking it for hollow defiance. "Or what?" he spat, stepping even closer until his chest pressed against Stephen's. The crowd held their breath. Stephen's eyes flickered, not with fear but with something else. Something quiet, something dangerous, but still he didn't move. He let the bikers believe they had broken him. He let the world think he was powerless, because Steven Seagal knew something the rest of them didn't. Patience wasn't surrender. It was the calm before the storm. Engines still rumbled, a low growl that shook the pavement beneath the gathering crowd. Steven Seagal stood in the center of it all, his empty paper bag clutched loosely in one hand, his groceries destroyed at his feet. Milk seeped across the asphalt, white rivers carving trails toward the gutter. The loaf of bread lay crumpled and dirty. The bundle of onions was snapped like a joke. The bikers laughed louder, proud of their cruelty. But what made the moment sting sharper was not the gang's taunts. It was the silence of everyone else. People were watching. Dozens of them. They had their phones in their pockets, their voices in their throats, their bodies capable of moving forward. But no one did. A man in a business suit muttered to his co-worker, "This guy's a fool. Should have just stepped aside. Why stand in their way?" The co-worker nodded quickly, adjusting his tie like the whole thing was an inconvenience, not an injustice. A young couple whispered to each other, the girl tugging at her boyfriend's arm. "Come on, let's just leave. I don't want to see this." But neither of them looked away, their curiosity stronger than their conscience. Near the curb, a teenager lifted his phone, pretending to text, but the faint glow of his camera recording gave him away. He smirked as he caught the milk splattered across Stephen's boots. "This is going viral," he whispered under his breath, already imagining the likes and shares. The cruelest words, though, came from a middle-aged woman standing behind the crowd. She shook her head and said loudly enough for others to hear, "That man's too proud. He asked for it. These gangs don't bother people unless they deserve it." Her words rippled through the bystanders like a poisonous excuse, giving them permission to stay frozen, to do nothing. Steven Seagal remained silent, his shoulders steady, his face unreadable. The bikers thrived on the crowd's silence. Every laugh grew bolder, every shove more careless. The leader paced in front of Stephen like a wolf circling prey, his boots leaving heavy prints on the cracked pavement. "Nobody's coming to help you, old man," he said with a smirk. "You hear that?" He raised his arms, turning to the onlookers. Anyone feel like stepping in?" The silence that followed was deafening. Not a word, not a step forward, not even a cough. The leader grinned and leaned closer, his voice a low growl meant only for Stephen. "They're not with you. They're with us. They know power when they see it." The gang roared in agreement, revving their engines, filling the air with smoke and noise. The smell of fuel mixed with spilled milk and crushed bread. A small boy tugged at his mother's hand, eyes wide. "Why isn't anyone helping him, Mama?" he asked, his voice trembling. The mother bit her lip, pulling him behind her legs. Because it's dangerous," she whispered, unable to look him in the eye. Stephen's gaze flickered briefly toward the boy, just for a second. A silent acknowledgement. His expression softened, then steeled again. The bikers didn't notice. They were too busy basking in their own performance, their audience feeding their egos. To them, Steven Seagal was already beaten, already humiliated. Another biker stepped forward, snatching the empty paper bag from Stephen's hand. He crumpled it and tossed it into the milk puddle with a laugh. "That's it. That's all you are now. Trash." The crowd gasped. But still no one moved. Whispers grew sharper, uglier. Why doesn't he fight back? Maybe he's scared. Maybe he's weak. He looks big, but he's useless. Every careless word cut deeper, not into Stephen himself, but into the perception of him. The image of a helpless man mocked by wolves, ignored by the herd. Yet through it all, Stephen Siegel stood like stone, silent, patient, immovable. The leader leaned in again, so close his breath brushed Stephen's face. Nobody's going to save you. And when we're done here, you'll wish you never walked out that door tonight. The crowd shivered. The bikers laughed. The night grew colder. And still, the man at the center didn't raise a hand. Not yet, because he was waiting, watching, letting the silence carve the stage. For when the storm broke, everyone, bikers, bystanders, whisperers, and doubters, would know exactly who they had underestimated. The laughter of the bikers echoed through the night, mixing with the low growl of engines and the restless murmur of the crowd. Stephen Siegel remained perfectly still in the center of it all. His groceries were ruined, his dignity mocked, his silence misread as weakness. But then, something subtle shifted. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a raised fist or a shouted word. It was the way Stephen rolled his shoulders back, loosening them, the way a predator stretches before striking. His hands flexed slightly at his sides, fingers moving as though testing invisible strings of energy. Most missed it. But not everyone. The little boy who had asked why no one was helping stared wide-eyed. "Mama," he whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "Look at his hands." The mother frowned, not understanding. To her, Stephen looked the same, quiet, still, unshakable. But to a child's eyes, something had changed. The leader of the bikers didn't notice either. He was too busy puffing out his chest and feeding on the crowd's fear. "See this?" he bellowed, pointing at Stephen like he was a trophy. "This is what happens when you don't respect us. This is what happens when you get in our way." The gang howled in approval. Stephen's gaze lowered briefly, catching sight of the spilled milk spreading wider across the asphalt. He stared at it, almost contemplative, before lifting his eyes to the men around him. There was no anger in his expression, no fear, just calm, a dangerous kind of calm. One biker, standing closer than the rest, suddenly shifted uncomfortably. He couldn't explain it, but something in Stephen's eyes unsettled him. "Boss," he muttered under his breath. "You sure about this guy?" The leader scoffed, slapping his shoulder. "He's nothing. Look at him, he hasn't even moved." But deep down, cracks of doubt were beginning to spread. The tension grew thicker, stretching like a bowstring pulled too far. Every second of silence, every unmoving breath became heavier. The crowd leaned in, torn between fear and curiosity. Something was coming. They could feel it. Stephen slowly adjusted the cuff of his jacket, pulling it back just enough to reveal a flash of fabric beneath. A belt, black as night, wrapped around his waist. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't flaunted. Just a glimpse, a whisper of truth. Most didn't see it, but the biker closest to him did. His laughter caught in his throat, dying suddenly as his eyes widened. "Wait," he stammered, pointing with a trembling finger. "Boss, look at his waist." The leader frowned, turning his head. For just a moment he saw it, the unmistakable strip of black cloth tied neatly, hidden under layers of clothing. His smirk faltered, only for a second. Then he barked a laugh to cover it up. "A belt, that's all?" he shouted, spinning to the crowd. "This guy thinks a karate belt is going to save him? Please, that's for kids." The gang erupted in laughter again, but there was a thin edge to it now, less certain, less free. The crowd, too, felt the shift. Some whispered, questioning what they'd seen. "Was that a black belt?" one man asked. "Karate?" another woman muttered. The rumor spread like a spark in dry grass. The little boy's eyes lit up. "Mama, did you see? He's a fighter. He's not weak." The mother hushed him quickly, though even she couldn't hide the unease in her eyes now. The leader noticed the change in the crowd's energy and clenched his jaw. He couldn't allow doubt to take root. He stomped forward, jabbing a finger into Stephen's chest. "I don't care what belt you wear under there," he sneered. "Tonight you're nothing." Stephen finally lifted his head fully, his voice low, almost a growl. "You've made a mistake." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. For the first time, the laughter faltered completely. Engines idled lower. The crowd hushed, leaning forward, sensing the shift. Stephen stepped forward, not aggressively, just one calm stride that seemed to shake the ground more than any biker's boot had. His presence filled the street in a way that defied explanation. The leader forced a laugh, but it cracked in the middle. "Oh yeah? Big words for a man with no backup." Stephen's eyes narrowed. "I don't need backup." The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the crowd forgot to breathe. The suspense wrapped around everyone's throats like a noose. Something was about to happen. Something none of them were prepared for. And though the bikers still tried to convince themselves they had the upper hand, deep in their guts, they began to feel the truth. They weren't hunting a victim. They had cornered a predator. The street was so quiet now that even the engines seemed to hesitate, their growls muted beneath the weight of tension. The crowd stood frozen, their whispers silenced. The bikers' laughter had cracked, replaced by nervous smirks and darting glances. And at the center of it all stood Steven Seagal. He hadn't moved much, just a single step forward, a quiet adjustment of his jacket. But that step carried more weight than the entire gang's shouting. It was a shift no one could ignore, the calm before a lightning strike. The leader barked a laugh, desperate to pull control back into his hands. "Enough of this," he shouted, waving his arm. "Somebody teach this old man a lesson." One of the bikers revved his engine, then swung his boot off the pedal, striding forward with a smirk. He cracked his knuckles, towering over Stephen. "You should have gone home with your groceries, Grandpa," he snarled. The crowd braced for impact, expecting Stephen to be flattened. But in a blur, the opposite happened. The biker swung his fist, a heavy arc meant to crush Stephen's jaw. But before it landed, Stephen's hand shot up, fast, precise, unstoppable. He caught the biker's wrist midair. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The biker's smirk vanished, twisting into shock as Stephen's grip tightened, forcing his arm into a lock. With a fluid motion, Stephen twisted his wrist downward, flipping the man off balance. The biker hit the pavement with a thud so loud it rattled teeth. Silence. The crowd couldn't believe what they'd seen. One moment, the biker was in control. The next, he was sprawled on the asphalt, groaning, his arm bent in a painful lock. Stephen released him and stood tall, his expression unchanged. Calm. Patient. Deadly. The leader's face hardened. "Don't just stand there," he roared. "Get him." Two bikers rushed forward at once. One came from the left, the other from the right, fists raised. Stephen didn't flinch. The first swung wild, aiming for his head. Stephen ducked effortlessly, his movements smooth as water. In the same motion, his elbow drove into the biker's ribs with brutal precision. The man crumpled instantly, air bursting from his lungs. The second biker lunged, trying to tackle Stephen from behind. Without even turning, Stephen shifted his weight, hooking his foot behind the man's ankle and sweeping. The biker's momentum betrayed him. He crashed onto the pavement face first. The crowd erupted in gasps and shouts. Phones came out now, recording every second. What had looked like an old man's humiliation had flipped into something extraordinary. The leader's smirk faltered. His men, his proud, untouchable gang, were falling like dominoes. Another biker pulled a chain from his belt, swinging it menacingly. "You're dead!" he yelled, rushing forward. Stephen stepped into his attack, not away from it. The chain swung wide, but Stephen's hand intercepted the biker's wrist. With a sharp twist, he disarmed him, sending the chain clattering to the ground. In the same breath, Stephen struck his opponent's chest with an open palm. The impact was so precise, so sudden, that the biker flew backward, crashing into his own motorcycle. The crowd gasped louder. A man in the back whispered, That wasn't luck. He knows exactly what he's doing. Whispers turned into realization, rippling through the people. The word began spreading fast. Black belt, karate, martial arts. But the bikers weren't ready to admit defeat. Rage drove them forward, pride refusing to let them back down. 4 of them circled Stephen now, moving cautiously, like wolves trying to corner a lion. Stephen adjusted his stance, one foot sliding, slightly back, his hands rising just enough to signal readiness. His eyes scanned them, not with panic but with the calm precision of a man who had seen every fight before it happened. The first lunged. Stephen sidestepped, guiding the man's momentum past him before striking the back of his knee. The biker dropped instantly. The second swung from behind. Without even turning his head, Stephen pivoted, his hand snapping upward to block, then striking with a sharp chop to the neck. The biker staggered, choking. The third charged low, trying to tackle. Stephen shifted, dropping his weight and slamming his elbow down onto the biker's back, driving him to the ground. The fourth froze, suddenly unsure. He had just watched 3 of his brothers fall in seconds. Stephen's eyes met his, calm, cold, deadly. The biker backed away slowly, shaking his head. "Nope, not me. I'm out," he muttered, stepping back toward his bike. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some still too stunned to speak. Stephen hadn't broken a sweat. The leader stood there, fury burning in his eyes, pride cracking under the weight of what he had just witnessed. His men, the ones who had laughed and mocked moments ago, were scattered around the pavement, groaning, clutching ribs, crawling away. Stephen straightened his jacket, his voice carrying like a blade. "I told you. You made a mistake." The leader's jaw clenched. He reached under his vest and pulled out a knife, the blade glinting under the streetlight. "You think this is over?" he growled. "I'll show you what happens to men who mess with us." The crowd gasped again, panic rippling through them. Some turned away, afraid of what was about to happen, but Stephen didn't flinch, his eyes locked on the blade, then on the man holding it. Calm, steady, unshakable. The storm had broken. And the real fight was only beginning. The streetlight gleamed off the blade as the leader flicked the knife open with a snap. The crowd gasped in unison, mothers pulling their children back, onlookers retreating toward storefronts. Phones zoomed in, recording every second. "Think you're tough, old man?" The leader growled, his voice shaking with rage. "Let's see how tough you are against this." The knife danced in his hand, flashing under the night sky. He lunged forward, aiming straight for Stephen Siegel's chest. But Stephen didn't move in panic. He didn't even blink. With a speed that seemed impossible for a man his size, his hand shot out, catching the leader's wrist mid-thrust. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The blade stopped inches from his chest, frozen in the air like time itself had paused. The leader snarled, trying to push forward, but Stephen's grip was iron. Calmly, he twisted the wrist outward, forcing the man's body off balance. The knife clattered to the pavement, spinning until it landed at the feet of the crowd. A young man near the front stepped on it quickly, kicking it out of reach. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Stephen wasn't finished. The leader swung with his free hand, wild and desperate. Stephen ducked, countering with a sharp elbow to the ribs. The man doubled over, coughing, air knocked from his lungs. Stephen guided him down, not with brute force but with precise control, locking his arm behind his back in a joint hold that left him immobilized. The roar of engines had gone quiet now. The gang that once looked invincible sat scattered, beaten, moaning on the ground. The leader was pinned, his face pressed against the cold asphalt, his arm twisted in a way that left him helpless. Stephen leaned down, his voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. "You chose violence. Now live with the consequences." The leader groaned in pain, his bravado shattered. All right, enough," he shouted, voice cracking. The crowd surged forward, their fear dissolving into energy. Some cheered, some clapped, others shouted, "Teach him a lesson." Phones flashed as cameras captured the moment. The mighty gang leader humbled in front of everyone by the very man they had mocked. Stephen released the lock, shoving the leader backward. The man stumbled onto his knees, gasping, sweat pouring down his face. His knife was gone, his men were defeated, and his reputation crumbled under the weight of silence. Stephen straightened his jacket, his breathing steady, his stance composed. Not once had he lost control. The leader looked up at him, shame and fury battling in his eyes. "You don't know who you're messing with," he growled weakly. Stephen's gaze was unshakable. "I don't care who you are. Respect is earned, not forced. Tonight you learned that." The crowd roared with approval, the energy shifting completely. No longer silent, no longer judging. Now they were united in awe. The businessman who had muttered earlier shook his head in disbelief. "I thought he was finished. But he's a master." The teenager with the phone lowered it for a moment, stunned. "This is going to blow up online," he whispered. One by one, the bikers limped back to their motorcycles, defeated and silent. Their engines sputtered to life, no longer proud or thunderous, but weak, retreating growls. They didn't look back. Even their own leader crawled toward his bike, humiliated, his arrogance shattered. Stephen didn't chase them. He didn't need to. Justice wasn't about revenge, it was about balance. And balance had been restored. The little boy who had watched it all tugged at his mother's sleeve again. "Mama," he saved himself. He didn't even get scared. The mother nodded slowly, her eyes wide. "He's not just anyone," she whispered. As the last motorcycle roared away into the night, the crowd turned back to Stephen. Dozens of eyes watched him, not with pity anymore, but with respect. Stephen bent down, picking up the ruined loaf of bread from the ground. It was dirty, flattened, unsalvageable. He held it in his hand for a moment, then let it drop back into the bag. His face softened, almost sad, but then he straightened once more, meeting the eyes of the boy in the crowd. For the first time he smiled. The boy grinned back, clutching his mother's hand tighter. Stephen gave a small nod, then turned away, walking calmly down the street as if nothing had happened. The crowd parted for him like a tide, their whispers now filled with reverence instead of judgment. Behind him, the sound of engines faded into nothing. Justice had been served. The night air felt different now. Where moments ago it had been heavy with fear and tension, it was now filled with a strange calm, a collective exhale. People lingered, whispering to one another, replaying the scene over and over in their minds. Stephen Siegel walked steadily down the street, his grocery bag tucked under one arm. The ruined bread inside didn't matter. What mattered was the quiet dignity with which he carried himself, untouched, unbroken, unafraid. Behind him, the little boy's voice rang out once more. "Sir?" Stephen paused. He turned, his eyes finding the boy again. The child stepped forward nervously, clutching the paper scrap he had been doodling on earlier. It was nothing more than a childish sketch of a stick figure standing tall against what looked like giant bikes. The boy's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as he held it out. This is you," he said softly. "You're the strong man." For the first time that night, Stephen's expression softened. He crouched slightly, taking the paper with careful hands as though it were the most valuable gift in the world. He gave the boy a small nod, a gesture that said more than words ever could. The mother pulled her son back gently, smiling at Stephen with quiet gratitude. No words were exchanged, they weren't needed. Respect had been earned without a single demand. Around them, people began to applaud. It wasn't loud or chaotic, but steady, heartfelt. Strangers from different walks of life, united in awe at what they had witnessed. Stephen tucked the boy's drawing into his jacket pocket and gave the crowd a final nod before disappearing into the night. His figure melted into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but whispers and the memory of what had unfolded. The boy tugged on his mother's sleeve again. "Mama, will he be okay?" She smiled softly. "He already is." And with that, the lesson hung in the air, unspoken yet clear to everyone who had witnessed it. Respect isn't taken by force, it's earned by strength, discipline, and dignity. Silent doesn't mean powerless. Invisible doesn't mean weak. And sometimes, the quietest man in the room carries the greatest power.